Welcome back to the program once again. If you're just joining us, this is Bottomline Africa, right here on KTN News. And here in Kenya, University of Nairobi students have castigated the administration of a decision to close down the institution over what they called security concerns. Now, the university was closed down indefinitely following recent unrest. At least 26 students were injured last Thursday when police raided lecture halls and hostels to stop student protest. Now, the protest was sparked by the arrest of Embakasi East Member of Parliament Paul Ongili, also known as Babu Owino, who has been accused of insulting President Uhuru Kenyatta. It also comes at a time of tension in the run-up to this month's rerun presidential election.
Hello? So tungoja tu. Yeah, nakusikia.
Comrades wanted to tell the government that Mbidi must go, and one of our comrades who has been constantly harassed by the police, one Babu Owino, to stop being harassed by the police because he's still a comrade, and comrade is always right. One Professor Mbidi, we want to tell him that he can postpone the problem, but he will not prevent the problem. His day was over at the University of Nairobi yesterday.
Personally, I'm not happy because we are taking longer than usual. So the way the things are going, I see ourselves staying in this particular university for more than 6 years.
Well, of course, that story and the closure of the oldest university in Kenya, the Nairobi University, will form the inroad of our discussion tonight. And in studio, once again, let me introduce our guest. We have Michael Agwanda, we have Jonathan Wesiaya, I've got that name right now, as well as Florence Mashio. And both Michael and Jonathan are educationists. Florence is a representative from Equality Now Group, which is a human rights organization. Now, good evening, gentlemen and lady. Welcome to the program.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening to you.
Yes, Jonathan, let me start with you. You've seen that development from the University of Nairobi, the closure of that institution. It has been closed indefinitely following that protest on Thursday. And you've seen the violence that erupted there, police, beating up students. So what is your view on this? Do you think our politics has spilled over into that institution?
I think let me begin by saying 30 years after the death of Sankara, in Africa, we need more thinkers, we need more ideology into our politics and leadership, and not a new set of dictators. What is happening in Nairobi University is unacceptable. Our children, citizens of this country, cannot be dragged out of their lecture halls and their hostels and beaten senseless, and then we have a system that says they are investigating what is happening. It's unfortunate if you listen to the remarks of the Inspector General of Police. He says, it sounded like this was a scene out of a movie. He says he's not even aware that it occurred in the first place. So it is shameful that in the 21st century, this is how we can treat the emerging leaders of this country.
Let me now cross over to Florence. Florence, I understand there's a program you presented in Addis, the African Union. You're going to tell us about that shortly. But do you think there's a need for governments, not just in Kenya, to protect these learning institutions?
Well, the children have a right to be protected. They have a right to an education. And the fact that they've closed the university, for me, and I agree with Jonathan, is really despicable. And for me, when the IG was speaking the other day, it sounded like an Olelenku moment. You remember when he said, the mattress is, the sounds you're hearing at Westgate are the mattress burning. Now, I don't know what our IG is thinking in terms of investigating, yet the police went all out to just make sure that they hurt the students, which is counterproductive because then you're putting the students on a defense.
Yes.
And closing the university is not a solution. You are postponing, just like one of the students said, you're postponing the problem. Yes.
Well said, Florence. Now, Michael, you've heard Florence comment there. The closing that institution is not part of the solution. And from what the IG spoke about, what are you reading in this? Are you seeing some sort of a disconnect between the senior officers and what is happening on the ground?
Thank you, Yusuf. The problem we have in this country is reacting to issues without first finding the facts. And I think this is a problem that our country and our leadership has had. What we saw in Nairobi University happening last Thursday must be condemned by all, the strongest term possible. And it should not be tolerated by the the discipline of forces and even the leadership. What I find baffling is the contradiction between what the students is narrating and the acknowledgement by the VC that he actually allowed the discipline forces to go into their dormitory. The mixed signals that we are getting from the IG and even the State House, the Speaker the spokesman, the President's spokesman, Mr. Manoa Esipiku. And when you look at all these things, they seem to be having a narrative that there were some goons in the dorms.
Yes.
What I'm wondering about is why those goons were not arrested. First of all, because they actually frog marched the students out of the dorms, and why the goons were not arrested and paraded and taken to court. If they found only students in those dorms, then they did the gravest mistake they could ever do, because those are their children, those are their nieces and nephews, those are some kids who are literally found in classroom, with their lecturers, but were hounded out of those classes and were beaten up. Now, to make even matters worse, you again close the institution. It costs a lot of resources for you to close the institution.
Yeah.
The parents are not ready. Some of those students are coming. I mean, just a small percentage is coming from Nairobi. Majority of those students are coming from our countries.
Yes.
Some of their parents are not able to afford even transport. And for your information, the college has just been closed now, and we don't know when it will be open. There were students that were actually starting their examinations on Friday. That simply means that if you close this exam, this institution,
yes,
indefinitely, we don't know when they will be able to do the exam. The students that were supposed to graduate in December might find themselves graduating next year. I mean, who is going to bear the cost, the extra cost of maintaining the students in school?
Yes. Well said, Michael. I'm going to come back to you, and we're going to talk about the University of Nairobi issue in length shortly. But Florence, let's now look at some other, learning institutions that is under threat, that is in West Africa. And at this moment, more than half of all schools in northeastern part of Nigeria have been closed. More than 1,400 schools have been destroyed for the last 8 years, I believe, since Boko Haram, whose name coincidentally, stands for or claims Western education is forbidden. So how do you think African governments will go forward and make sure these learning institutions are safe for students?
I think African governments have decided not to do what is necessary. We find certain parts of the country, even our country, in northern Kenya, it's a bit porous,
yes,
and we don't seem to put in the finances to ensure that we protect our students, or we protect even the population that is there. So whatever Boko Haram is doing, and I know, Buhari came in with the promise that he's going to deal with Boko Haram, but as you can see, we have children who are out of school because the government somehow is unable to protect its own citizen. And what I always say is, and this is a personal view,
yes,
that if as a government you are unable to protect your citizen, and instead, like in Kenya, you're trying, to stifle them, then you have no business being a government, because you are supposed to protect your citizens. So in Nigeria, what is happening is unfortunate, and it is absurd, because it's our children who are losing out. It is the continent who is losing out. We have always said that the children are our future, but I believe they're our present. Now, if we don't deal with the present, you can imagine what kind of future we have as a continent. Yes.
Well said, Florence. Jonathan, I hope you've heard what Florence said. It's the role of any government to protect its citizens. And of course, students also form part of this group. Bearing in mind, let me just return you back to what happened at the UN on Thursday. What you've seen there, students being flogged much by police officers. Do you think the government of Kenya is doing the same thing Florence is saying, protecting its citizens, including students?
I don't think we are doing much, and the Nairobi University incident is highlighted because it is in the city of Nairobi as the capital, but many of these things are happening in far-flung areas. If you go into Garissa, into Wajir, into Mandera, there are children who are not able to realize their right to education because the government cannot guarantee them safety into school. The government cannot guarantee them quality learning when they get into school. And as we speak, the World Bank just released its development report for 2018, and it's the first report by the World Bank Development Group that is dedicated to education. And it is not looking rosy for us, and I think the bottom line is that there is a lot of schooling that is happening, especially in Kenya, but there isn't learning. And the report terms it as the greatest injustice to humanity, because if you go into an education system and you are not facilitated to learn, what the system is doing to you is locking your future potential. You will not be functional, you will not be a useful member of the society where you need to operate. So we need to move, we need to connect our political and economic decisions towards driving better learning outcomes and not clobbering children and our brothers and sisters in learning institutions.
And this is where I want to bring Michael into the discussion once again. Michael, of course, you've seen the development there on Thursday, once again, on the University of Nairobi. And from time to time, we've always been seeing, these student leaders mingling and interacting with the political class. Do you think schools' management have been highly politicized at the same time?
I really don't think so. I just think that we are creating a system in our society where basically we are, we've separated ourselves from the discipline force and the common mwananchi. We only see policemen when they are arresting people. We only see policemen when they're coming to watch on us when we're doing exams in class 8 and when we're doing exams in Form 4. We only see a policeman when there are riots that are supposed to be quelled. And the nature of stabilizing the riot is not a civil way. And so we find a society where this, the common mwananchi is far removed from the police force or the police service, that they have no interaction with them. The policemen are living in the police line for that reason. They're not living with us in the community. And when we see them, they carry guns or the batons, and they're after somebody's life in one way or the other. This disconnect should not be there. I think the developed world have made the police force or the police service be part of the society, where they go and mingle with the students, where they go and mingle with the society, where they are involved in recreational activities, where they come into the society and tell them what they have and how they want to manage insecurity and how they want to ensure that the citizens are also part of the security within them. But what we are seeing is a situation where basically in Kenya, as students, when they're when they get out there, their first, enemy is the policeman. I don't think the police force should be an enemy of the people, not even the students themselves. But their actions have sort of made them the enemy of the students. And I think they must change their way of thinking and should be able to know that these are their children, these are their nieces, these are their nephews, and these are the leaders of tomorrow. And if they are hurt, that means our future is also hurt. You had these students that the country has invested hugely on, and then are you going to, complain tomorrow that we do not have enough doctors or enough engineers, or and yet you are in the process of ensuring that they were not successful in their education. So I think our perception, our orientation with the police force need to change, and that can only happen when our leaders proactively engage in these two, constituencies.
Yes.
The discipline force and the citizens.
Yeah. Well said, Michael. Now, Florence, let's get a break a bit from the universities and talk about what is happening in Kenyan high schools. We're going to talk about Nigeria and DRC shortly, but we've seen several cases of, fire tragedies in high schools across the country. And at some point, was it last year? It was happening almost on a daily basis. So their researchers were saying this is basically a reflection of what is happening in the society. Do you think those two issues relate in any way?
The researchers are right. What is happening in our schools is a reflection of us, and it's also a reflection of the society at large. Equality Now has been doing what we've called 25 conversations in 25 schools in Africa. So we've gone to different countries and different schools in Africa. And what the children are saying is really shocking, because we were talking to children between 12 and 18 years old. And what they are depicting is happening at home, then can tell you that the fires are not starting in school, they're starting at home. There's something happening at home that has not been dealt with. There's something happening in the society that has not been dealt with, that now is manifesting itself in the broader arena, which is in the schools. And the fires and everything else is a way of getting attention of us adults. If I could just read you one quick card.
Yes, please.
Randomly picked from a student. This one is 15 years old. So she asks, if you have been raped by a close family member and your parents do not want the person to be reported, what is the best way to handle the situation? Now, this is a child who's been violated by somebody who's close home, a family member, and she's worried. What should I do? My parents want us to keep quiet. And therefore, the sound of silence, where children are supposed to raise up issues when they happen, raise up issues in universities, raise up issues. We have no opportunity for children to speak out and say, this is going on in my life, this is wrong, and therefore we remedy it. But all we do is we keep them quiet, and we have created
Florence,
a sound of silence.
I understand it's the same finding that you presented in Addis, that is the African Union. What are they doing about this?
Well, I was actually in Mauritius. We had a meeting with the African Union Committee of Experts in charge of the welfare and the rights of the child. Kenya and most African countries, Nigeria included, Tanzania, Uganda, have ratified this charter. And this charter in Article 11 talks about protecting the right of the child to an education, creating a nice environment for the child to learn, and not just learn, that this child should be protected from all elements, including if she's harmed at home or he's harmed at home, the state needs to create mechanisms to keep this child safe. Now, in a scenario where you're seeing the state is the one perpetuating the violence against its own children, then there's a problem, because there was a clip going on of tear gas thrown in a school, in a kindergarten, and we, not so long ago, we had tear gas being thrown at children at Langata Primary School. Now, if you have a state like that, which has signed and ticked the box that we have ratified, you know, the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, yet it goes against the same charter, then we need to ask ourselves, why in God's name are we ratifying? Why in God's name are we writing laws that we say we protect our children, like the Children's Act, and we're doing nothing about protecting them?
Exactly. Now, Jonathan, once again, research indicates that the most widespread form of school-related violence is bullying. And I'm sure you've heard what Florence has been talking about there, that what is happening in our schools, especially high schools, is a reflection of what is happening in the society. Do you think the
Now, for us to have this, yes, we need to put this into, perspective and get the larger context, in that as we speak, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, and the goal number 1 is that we need to end poverty in its all forms elsewhere, everywhere. And goal number 4 is on education, in that we need to ensure that education is inclusive, equitable, and it enhances lifelong learning opportunities for all. Now, this means that the education institutions need to be friendly to the children. The facilitators of the education process need to be on top of their capacity to facilitate this learning. Now, in Kenya, as things are, we are actually sliding back to where we were in 1974, when we had strikes, and in a period of 1 month, we had over 100 schools burnt down by secondary school children.
Yes.
Professor Kabiru, the current Vice Chancellor of Chuka University, wrote about this. And we seem to be falling back to the same trap, that when this happens over and over, we have a way of blaming the victim. We go back to the child and say the child is indisciplined, the child is not doing their best, while the pressure, as Machio has mentioned, is beginning from home. We have parents who are socializing their children, that at age 2.5, you need to read the newspaper headline in English, and then you are bright. While there are so many other things that these children need to be learning, which is collaboration. They need to know that they exist in a community.
Yes.
They need to learn to communicate effectively so that their desires are attended to. But the teachers who are facilitating the process are only promoted out of the mean score they get at the end of an exam.
That's interesting.
So we have a system that is running parallel to each other, not talking, the left hand not talking to the right, but then we want to obtain a result. And this is where Kenya is losing its foothold in Africa in matters development and driving the education sector.
Well said, Jonathan. Michael, let me just play back that question once again to you. We had some sound problem earlier, and it seems Jonathan and Florence are in agreement that what is happening in the society is also reflected in what is happening, case in point, in our high schools, you know, the fire tragedies that we have been seeing. And now that we are in some sort of a political situation where there's, you know, bare knuckles politics, you know, politicians calling each other names, we're seeing demonstrations. Do you think this will go ahead and danger or, you know, worsen the situation in the high schools even more?
Let me start by alluding to some of the references my friend and colleague Florence talked about.
Yes.
And that is enabling our students to be able to speak freely, both at home level and also in school. I want to give an example of my son, who is 8 years old.
Yes.
And I was taking him to school this term, and then he refused to step out of the car. And I asked him, what's the matter? And he said, I don't want to go to that class because that teacher really hurts me. And I say, why haven't you told me that? And he said, well, I didn't know how to tell you that. But I said, what does she do? Oh, she pinches me so badly. And where does it where does she pinch? And he told me, right on my back here, you know, where I will not be able to show you, you know, something like that. And looking at the way kids have been sort of bullied in school, both by, you know, sometimes even teachers and their fellow colleagues. If we don't allow our children to talk without necessarily reprimanding them, like in our society where a child says, oh, I was punished in school and I feel it was not fair, and then a parent says, well, you need to be even be punished more. I don't think that's the way we need to bring up our children.
Yes.
I remember doing one important thing, going to the teacher and saying, I need to know why you've been punishing this child. And I don't want to say that you can't really reprimand a child for wrongdoing, but I want you to let me know that this child did A, B, C, D. Will you be able also to talk to this child? So that it's not just a responsibility of the teacher, but it's also the responsibility of the parent as well. And I believe that's... But going forward to what is happening in the political arena, quite unfortunate, Yusuf. You're seeing a lot of insult back and forth. If these are going to be the people we want to emulate, if these are going to be the people we want to mentor students, we are in a wrong path as a society, and we must redirect our language, we must redirect our even political affiliation if it will force us to say things that our children are going to take to the street. For your information, my child asked me, you know, are you Jubilee or NASA? I mean, this is just a young boy, and I'm wondering, where did you get to know that? Because all
they're
they
very
see
observant.
on TV...
Yes, they're very observant, Michael. Now, let me hear your view, Florence, very briefly on this. And in DRC, South Sudan, soldiers use schools as bases or barracks. And then right here in Kenya and most African countries, these same schools are used as polling stations. And we all know what happens in polling stations during election, you know, violence and everything. And Michael has agreed to the fact that, you know, children are very, you know, they observe everything. So do you think alternatives should come forth when it comes to these polling stations?
I think thinking that our polling stations or, you know, translating our schools into polling stations maybe makes the problem larger. I think that's not it.
Yes.
For me, it is what are we doing at home as parents to protect the children that we've been given to protect. If we are the same ones violating them, that we should not be shocked when the same happens in society. And I think in line with, you know, linking with politics, it's what we are speaking at home that the children are picking up. It's what they are seeing our leaders saying or doing, abusing each other, and nothing is done. And they perpetuate the same thing in the society. So I think for me, whether the polling stations remain in schools or whether we vote like Germany and, you know, we all put in the post office box and our ballot is picked on the other end, it really does not speak to the child in the sense, are we protecting the child from home? And number two, are we creating spaces even in our learning institutions for children to speak up so that we can arrest issues? Because if, for example, a child is violated by a teacher, you tell me where this child is going to go. Is there an opportunity for this child to go and say, this is what has happened to me, and therefore get the necessary psychological help, you know, health, protection, all that, and also the teacher, not to be moved from one school to another. So for
Florence,
me,
yes, well
it's
said.
not about the polling stations.
Well said. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We would have loved to hear more from you. Now, Jonathan, your final comment moving forward, what needs to be done in order to keep the lives of children safe in schools?
We need to reclaim the education space in Kenya. We cannot be encouraging our children to wake up early in the morning and go to school while they continue to aspire to be doctors, and they know doctors have been on strike for 100 days, nobody did anything.
That's right.
Nurses are on strike, I think it is over 115 days or thereabout. Nobody's saying anything. So we need to trace the value thread in education so that our children's aspirations are linked to a dream that is real, that is able to be facilitated and be safeguarded by the government.
Well said. Jonathan Wasiaya, right?
Wesaya.
Wesaya. I'm sorry, I've been saying Wesaya. He's an educationist. Many thanks for your input. Florence Machio as well. She is a representative from Equality Now. It's a human rights group, as well as Michael Agwanda, who is an educationist. Many thanks for your input within the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, let's cross over to images of the day. And Nigeria recently held its first ever beer festival in the commercial capital, that is Lagos, an event aimed at promoting the country's top brews. Now, the week-long event, which began on September 25th, ended with a big party that coincided with the country's 57th Independence Day celebration, marked on October 1st. Over 20 beer brands were on display during the festival, attracting hundreds of people who came to sample the drinks. Nigeria is Africa's second biggest beer market, which is currently dominated by Heineken and Diageo. I hope I got that right.
The festival brings everybody together to just have fun and relax, and you can take your mind off stress and just be yourself here. I mean, and today is Independence, so another reason to celebrate.
It's just for me to come with my friends to entertain ourselves. I'm not really into beer, but most times when I take beer, I feel comfortable. I really feel comfortable. Nice.
The first edition, it was, I must tell you, very challenging. Convincing the people, trying to introduce what beer festivals should be like. It's not a beer village that Nigerians are used to, just sitting down and drinking. It's supposed to be a celebration of lifestyle, a celebration of culture, a celebration of the people, a celebration of beer. Okay, so it took time trying to convince people, convince the brewery, the major breweries, stakeholders, and government about the need for this to happen, and that's what you see today.
From Nigeria there, and there's no way we're going to end the show without the proverb of the day. Let's take a look. A very interesting proverb there from Ghana. And earlier in the program, we did ask you in a Twitter poll, do you believe security is the main reason for the closure of the University of Nairobi? That is the oldest institution of higher learning. Do you believe security is the main reason for the closure of the University of Nairobi? That was our question. And 27% of you said yes. 73% of you said no. Let me go through some of your feedback here very quickly. Bing Charlie says, University of Nairobi was closed to cover police brutality. Mike 047 says, who feels insecure when students are learning? It's high time we start the session. Okay, that's, let me read one more. And Geoffrey Ongaya says, UN staff and Senate wishes all students Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I'm going to go through some of them before the end of the program. But for now, let me go straight on our bottom line tonight. And let me begin by saying there's no way we can talk about the prosperity of youth in Africa without changing the inappropriate and sometimes careless way by which governments treat education institutions, the bedrock of any country's future. And it's not just the government, but the toxic political climate that sometimes surround and spill into institutions of learning, especially universities. Now, education in Africa has also sustained a lot of horror stories, mainly in the hands of militants. Case in point, the April 2014 incident in Nigeria, where more than 200 schoolgirls were abducted by the Boko Haram militants. In Kenya, the April 1st Garissa University attack that resulted in the death of 147 innocent students is still fresh in our minds. Such stories in Africa are a case of different script but same cast, with cases of torture, abduction, and in some cases, even forced marriages continue to threaten the education system in the continent. Now, it's important to note, however, that such stories are also not peculiar to Africa, as we have also seen cases of insecurity in school, both in the US and the UK. But here's the difference. They manage the insecurities or threats and how they effectively deploy resources against these threats. Therefore, what we are saying is that it's the duty of any legitimate government to offer adequate security to its citizens, especially students, and not expose them to the jar already full of potential threats. And that is the bottom line tonight. Many thanks for watching. My name is Yusuf Ibrahim. Remember, this program is aired every Monday to Thursday from 10 to 11 p.m. Until tomorrow, same place, same time. Bye-bye, and enjoy the rest of your night.